In this video, I'm going to show you how to install Linux on a virtual machine. Now, for those of you who don't know what it is, a virtual machine is essentially a sandboxed, separate operating system running on your host machine. And when I say host machine, I am talking about the actual physical computer that you're on right now. Now, obviously, every operating system needs to have physical hardware to run on. But you can actually run several operating systems on one computer simultaneously using virtual machines. Because a virtual machine, or a guest as it is often referred to, is essentially just a virtual, a separate operating system borrowing the host's hardware to run. Now, there are many practical advantages to virtual machines, and one of them is that they can be destroyed and created at will. So, let's say you want to create several different virtual machines to simulate a small local network, and then you decide that you want to clean them up because they're taking up space in your computer. All of these things can be done with just a click of a button. It's really quick and easy, and it doesn't affect your core system so that you don't actually mess with things as you're learning. But probably the main advantage for this course is that a virtual machine is sandboxed and separate from your operating system. So we're going to be learning some system administration things and just the general terminal-based workflow. And when you're learning that, it's very nice to be able to just experiment freely without worrying about breaking or modifying your host computer. Because, well, if you happen to break something on your virtual machine, no harm done. You can just create a new one and restart it, and your computer will still be there when you turn off your virtual machine. So, let's get into how to do that. Now, in order to create a virtual machine, you're going to need two things. First, you're going to need a program that actually serves and manages virtual machines. In this case, we're going to be using VirtualBox. And you're going to need an ISO image file for the operating system that you're going to install. Now, don't worry if you don't know what these things are yet. I'm going to show you. So the first thing we need to do is install VirtualBox. You just go to your web browser, and I'm going to search for VirtualBox. And it's this web page over here, virtualbox.org. So you're going to be greeted with something like this and a big old blue download button that says Download VirtualBox. Go ahead and do that. And if you're on Windows, you select this one, Download for Windows hosts, because you're going to be hosting on a Windows machine, or OS X hosts if you're using a Mac, and then follow the installer instructions from there. If you are already on Linux, you can probably download this through your package manager. Just consult the package manager for your specific Linux distribution. Now, after you've downloaded and installed VirtualBox and you open it up, you're going to be greeted with something like this. Now comes the second part of the installation process, which is to download the ISO image file for the operating system we're going to be using. For this course, I'm going to be using Ubuntu, but you can download whichever one you like. The installation process is pretty much the same. So, to download that file, you open up your web browser and you go to ubuntu.com. Head on over to Downloads, and you're going to get this green button that says 20.04 LTS. You click on that, and it takes you to the download page. Now, once you've downloaded that file, I'm going to show you how to install it using VirtualBox. Now, after you've downloaded that file, go ahead and put it somewhere where you can easily find it again. Throughout this course, I'm going to put all of my virtual machines in a folder just called Virtual Machines. You can go ahead and create that wherever you want. And inside of that folder, I've created another folder called Images, which is where I have put the Ubuntu 20.04 .iso file. So you can set that up however you like, but just put it somewhere where so you can easily find it later, because we're going to need it when we're installing the virtual machine. So if you have it, let's go ahead and install Ubuntu. Inside of VirtualBox, click on the New button. This will take you up to the setup process for installing a new virtual machine. Now you can give it a name here, whichever you like. I'm just going to call mine Ubuntu_01. And here you'll want to put it in a folder for all of your virtual machines. Now, my folder is called Virtual Machines, just like that. And it is smart enough to recognize the type here, the type Linux and Ubuntu 64-bit. If it doesn't detect this automatically, set it to type Linux and version Ubuntu 64-bit manually, because that's kind of important. The next part of the installation process is deciding how much memory from your host operating system that your virtual machine is going to be able to use. Now, if you set this lower, the virtual machine is going to be quite slow. I think it's generally a good idea to bump it up to around where the green mark ends. This makes sure that your virtual machine is not too sluggish and the installation process doesn't take forever. The next part of the process is to create a virtual hard disk. Now, this is kind of important since you're going to want to be storing files on your virtual machine. It's pretty hard to use it otherwise. So I'm going to go ahead and create a virtual hard disk now. So you check that and click on Create. And for the hard disk file type, choose VDI, VirtualBox Disk Image. Now you can either choose to make that hard disk dynamically allocated, which means that it will continue to expand on your host operating system as needed, but I personally prefer to keep it fixed. This is more of a personal preference. And here you decide how big that virtual hard disk is going to be. 10 gigabytes isn't a lot, and if I remember correctly, Ubuntu will not even be able to install on a disk that is that small. I'm going to go ahead and set mine to 100 gigabytes. That should be plenty. Now remember, this space on your actual physical hard disk will not be allocated forever. As soon as you delete your virtual machine, this space will be freed up. So you can be a little generous with it. That's no problem. So set it up however you like, and go ahead and click Create. And there you go. Now your virtual machine has been created. But this is just a very bare bones version of that virtual machine. So before you click that big green Start button, we're going to need to actually load the ISO image file. So you highlight your virtual machine that you just created, and you go to the Settings tab. Let's look through this and check out that everything actually looks good. On the Basics, we have the name that we just created, and on the Advanced tab, you can select this bidirectional drag and drop and shared clipboard. This means that if you copy something on your host machine, you can paste it again on your virtual machine. I don't think this will be strictly speaking necessary for this course, but it's a nice convenience to have. Go over to System and you can see the memory allocation settings that we set before. Everything looks good here. On display, the default settings should be fine, but if you're having some problems related to displaying graphics, maybe you could bump up the video memory a bit, but I don't think we're going to be needing that. The most important part is to go to the storage. Now, in this part over here, this says Control the IDE, and underneath it says Empty, No Disk Image File Selected. We're going to click that, and I'm going to click on this disk button here, choose a disk file. This is where you're going to go and find the ISO image file that you downloaded. Let's go click on that. And in my case, the location of that file is virtualmachines/images. So you go find your file wherever it is located and double click on it, and it will load it right there. Now this is what it should look like. If everything looks like this up at this point, good, you're good to go. I'm going to click OK. And after that, we are ready to start the installation process. So when you click the Start button, you're going to be greeted with something like this, just a small window with a black screen. You can go ahead and remove these pop-ups. Now we see something interesting. This is actually a simulated screen of what the machine looks like. And here you can see it's going to start the Ubuntu installer. So I'm just going to let it load for a bit, and then we'll be greeted with the graphical installer for Ubuntu. And there you go. That's the installer for Ubuntu. Now you have two options here. You can either choose to try Ubuntu, in which case it will not actually install anything, it will just boot you into a live version of the operating system. Now this is usually a good idea if you're running Ubuntu from a USB stick and you want to try it out. But we're going to install Ubuntu, and keep in mind now, it's going to install Ubuntu on the virtual machine, not your actual host machine. So I'm going to click that. And here it will take us to the keyboard layout. So I'm using a Swedish keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and set that. And you can of course set yours to whichever fits. Good, everything seems to be working. Let's click on the Continue button. And it will ask us about updates and other software. Now a normal installation includes many default programs such as a web browser, utilities, office software, some games and media players. but we're not going to be needing any of that, and I prefer to do a minimal installation. So I'm going to click minimal installation. You can do normal if you like, but we will not be using any of the programs that comes with the normal installation. Then you can also check this that says download updates while installing Ubuntu. I think it's generally a good idea to click that. And as well as third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi. Now, some people are a bit divided about this. They don't want to use any proprietary drivers, but I tend to prioritize convenience for these sorts of things. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. I'm going to click continue. And here it will ask you to erase the disk and install Ubuntu. Now again, this is on your virtual machine, so this may look a bit scary, but this is not actually going to erase anything on your host computer. You will want to click this, erase disk and install Ubuntu. So you check that and click install now. And this will begin the installation process. Click continue. And after you've selected your region, in my case it's Stockholm, well, close enough, you are going to be given a prompt to set up your first user. I'm just going to call mine Joseph, and my computer's name will be Ubuntu 01. That sounds good. And your username should be, well, whatever you want. I still think it's a good idea to set a password for this one, so I'm just going to set something simple. And check require my password to log in. You can do with this whatever you want. I'm going to click continue. And from here on out, it's going to go ahead and install the entire operating system with the settings we provided. Now, depending on your setup and how much memory you allocated to your virtual machine, this could take a while. But don't worry, you just let it sit there and do its thing, and I'll see you on the other side once we're done with the installation. If it asks you to restart or something like that, you just click OK. It will not restart your actual computer, only the virtual machine. So, if everything has gone according to plan, you should have something like this. It says the installation is complete. Just click on Restart Now. And it will ask you to remove the installation medium. Now, we don't actually have one, so we can just press Enter. After a successful reboot, you'll be greeted with a login screen. So just click on your username, type in your password, and there you go, you're logged in. This new Linux installation is now working, and you can just use it as you would with an actual installation on your host machine. So I'm gonna go ahead and click Next. I don't need to set up live patch, and I would not like to send system information. And I click on Next, and I do not need location services either. And there we go. Click Done, and you're in. Now, you could go ahead and explore the system if you want, but there are a few things we should probably set up before we get going. If you maximize the screen like this, you can see that, well, the screen doesn't scale. We're going to need to install some things to make that work properly. If at any point you are prompted like this to update software, you can do that later. So just click Remind Me Later. And now we're going to need to open up a terminal. Now, usually this is Control-Alt-T to open up a terminal like that. Or you can also press the Super key or the Windows key, or wherever it is on your computer, and type in Terminal, and click that. But I prefer to use the hotkeys. Now we're going to install some things via a package manager, and I will show you more about how the package manager works later, but for now, just follow along with what I do. Once you are in the terminal, type in these commands: sudo apt install, which will tell the apt package manager that we want to install the things that will follow here. The first thing we want is build essential, then we want dkms, and we want the Linux headers. And now comes the tricky part, and this is also something I'll explain later, but just follow along. A $, opening parentheses, uname -r, closing parentheses. Okay, press enter on that one, and type in your password. And it's going to list a bunch of packages that it will be installed. It will ask you to continue. Now the default is Y, so you can just press enter or Y. And it will install all of these packages, which will take a moment. Now that that's all finished, there are just a couple of more things we have to set up before we can get started properly. You can close down the terminal by pressing Ctrl D or just clicking this little cross up here. So to finalize these post-installation tweaks, head on over to Devices, click on Insert Guest Editions CD image, and it might ask you to download something if it's not on your computer already. So if it asks you this, just click Download and let it finish. And if it asks you if you're sure, yes, click Download. Now, in my case, since I've already done this installation before, it's going to ask me to replace an already existing file. If for any reason you have an already existing file, just go ahead and replace it. And when that's all done, click Insert. And when you get this prompt with that big scary red button there, just click Run. And it will ask you for your password. Go ahead and now just let this installer finish. And then when it's done, just press Enter. And at this point, it's a good idea to turn off the virtual machine and turn it back on. So I'm not going to reboot it. I'm actually going to power it off. Click Power Off. And then when you start it again, everything should be working fine. Now, if it still doesn't automatically maximize when you restart the virtual machine, just try maximizing and minimizing the window again, and it should update and resize accordingly. And if you have something that looks like this, congratulations, you're done with the installation. Now, all of these post-installation tweaks are only because we are running this on a virtual machine. If you were installing Linux on your actual host system, or rather as your host system, you probably wouldn't need to do all of these tweaks. Just a heads up. Well, that's it. We're done. If you want to make it look even nicer, you can go up to View and click Full Screen Mode. However, it will give you this prompt and telling you that you're now going to be switching to having the virtual machine fully capture your mouse output. That is fine. You can see down here in the lower right corner that it has marked Right Control as the host key. That means that whenever I want to regain control of my actual real host desktop, you can just hold down Right Control and you get your controls back. So there you go. And now you can use this installation as if it, well, as if you had installed Ubuntu on your computer. And if I bring up the terminal, everything looks nice and works great. Now, to download new software, you can go straight to this Ubuntu software program. However, I would not recommend that you get used to this since it is only a Ubuntu specific thing and not generally a Linux thing. In this course, I'm actually going to show you how to use a command line based package manager, which will make transitioning to other Linux distributions later much easier and is generally the preferred way of installing new software on Linux based operating systems. But that is it for this lesson. You have now successfully installed a Linux-based operating system on a virtual machine. In the next video, we're going to be exploring this new operating system, and I'm going to show you a bit how it works, the general design philosophy, and how you can get your bearings. Because, well, it does take a bit of getting used to. So, with all that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.